My name is Naomi Carter, and if you're hearing this, it means the truth is finally being spoken. I never thought I would be telling this story. I never thought I would die, but I did. And what I saw on the other side changed everything. It was an ordinary evening, the kind of evening where you don't expect anything unusual to happen. I had just finished my shift at the hospital, exhausted but relieved to be heading home. As a nurse, I had spent my day moving from room to room, caring for patients, listening to their stories, and offering comfort where I could. I was used to the long hours, the emotional weight, the constant need to push through fatigue. That night. Rain was falling in heavy sheets against my windshield, the wipers working overtime as I navigated the slick roads. The sound of gospel music played softly through my speakers, a familiar comfort in the darkness. I remember thinking about my mother, about how she used to sing these same songs when I was a child. I smiled, letting the memories warm me even as the storm raged outside. I never saw the truck coming. One moment, I was gripping the wheel, focused on the road ahead. The next, there was blinding light, headlights, too close, too fast. My heart slammed against my ribs as I tried to react, but there was no time. The impact was brutal. Metal screamed against metal, glass shattered, and my body was thrown forward with unimaginable force. Then, silence. I didn't feel pain. I didn't feel anything. At first, I thought I was still inside my car, but when I looked down, I saw my body, crumpled, motionless, trapped between twisted metal and broken glass. Blood streaked my face, my chest barely rising and falling. I should have been terrified. I should have panicked. But instead, I felt weightless, detached, as if I was watching a movie, except I was in it. Then I noticed the light. It wasn't coming from the wreckage. It wasn't the flashing red and blue of emergency vehicles, which were now arriving at the scene. It was something else, something alive, a presence that called to me without words. The moment I saw it, I knew. This was not of this world. I felt myself being pulled toward it, effortlessly gliding through the air. Below me, paramedics were working desperately, shouting commands, trying to save a body that no longer felt like mine. One of them, a young man with dark hair, pressed his hands to my chest, his voice urgent as he fought to bring me back. But I wasn't coming back. I drifted higher, the noise of the world fading into nothing. The rain, the sirens, the voices, all of it disappeared. Only the light remained. It was warm, but not in a way I could explain. It wrapped around me, through me, filling me with a sense of peace deeper than anything I had ever known. Then I heard my name, Naomi. The voice was unlike anything I had ever heard before. It wasn't loud, yet it echoed through every part of me. It wasn't harsh, yet it carried more authority than any voice in existence. It wasn't just sound, it was truth. And in that moment, I knew exactly who was speaking. Jesus. I turned, and there he was. There are no human words to describe what I saw. No painting, no scripture, no dream could ever capture his presence. His light wasn't just around him, it was him. His eyes held the depth of eternity, and yet when he looked at me, I felt completely known. Completely seen. There was no fear, no doubt, only love. I fell to my knees, overwhelmed. But even as I basked in the presence of pure holiness, something shifted. A weight settled over me. Not from him, but from something else. A truth I wasn't prepared to see. Jesus looked at me with sorrow. Not because he was sad to see me, but because he was about to show me something I would never be able to forget. He reached out, his hand glowing with divine light, and the moment his fingers brushed against mine, everything changed. The light around us dimmed. The warmth faded, replaced by something heavier, darker. I was no longer standing in the glow of heaven. I was somewhere else, somewhere colder. At first, I didn't understand what I was seeing. Shadows stretched across a vast expanse, shifting and writhing as if alive. I could hear whispers, indistinct and unsettling, weaving through the air like a chorus of unseen voices. Then, in the distance, I saw something, or someone, a figure, walking toward Me? My heart stopped. I knew that face. The world knew that face. Princess Diana. She looked exactly as I remembered her. Elegant, poised, yet there was something different. A sadness in her eyes, a weight in her expression. It wasn't the face of a royal. It was the face of someone who had seen too much. She opened her mouth to speak, but before she could, everything around me began to tremble. The shadows thickened. The whispers grew louder, turning into something more like distant screams. Jesus' voice cut through the chaos, steady and unwavering. You must see the truth. Then, in a flash, we were somewhere else entirely. I was standing in the middle of a grand, opulent room, the kind you see in movies about royalty and power, the kind filled with gold and chandeliers and paintings of men long dead. But there was something wrong, something deeply, deeply wrong. The people in the room were talking, but their words didn't match their expressions. They were smiling, laughing, toasting with crystal glasses, but beneath the surface, there was something hollow, empty, as if they were nothing more than performers in a play they didn't write. Diana was there. She stood among them, unnoticed, unseen, like a ghost wandering through a memory. Her eyes met mine, and for the first time she spoke. They never wanted the world to know. I felt my stomach tighten. I didn't know what she meant, but I knew, deep in my soul, I was about to find out. Jesus turned to me, his eyes filled with a sorrow I couldn't comprehend. It's time you see what was hidden. Then, the world around me shattered. Everything fell away. The palace, the figures, the golden glow of wealth and power. And in its place, the truth. I couldn't breathe. Not because I needed air. There was no pain, no struggle, but because what I was seeing defied everything I had ever believed. The world around me had shattered, and in its place was something raw, something unfiltered. A reality hidden beneath the surface of everything I had known. Jesus stood beside me, his presence steady, unwavering. His eyes held something I couldn't quite define. A sorrow, yes, but also a knowing. A weight that only he could bear. I turned to him, my voice barely a whisper. What is this? His gaze met mine, and in that instant, knowledge flooded into me, not through words, but through understanding. I wasn't just seeing a vision, I was witnessing the truth. And then, the scene before us began to move. At first, it was subtle. Figures, shifting, voices murmuring, but then it became something more. The grand room, with its chandeliers and golden decor, was no longer just a room. It was a stage, a performance. The people, dressed in their silk and jewels, smiled, laughed, clinked their glasses together in mock celebration. But beneath the surface, their joy was empty. Their words were rehearsed, their movements mechanical, like puppets on invisible strings. Then, from the far side of the room, a woman stepped forward. Diana. The moment I saw her, my breath caught. It wasn't just her face, it was the way she moved, the way her presence shifted the air around her. There was something about her that didn't belong there. She was one of them. Yet, she wasn't. She walked among the figures, unnoticed, unseen. A ghost in a world that had already buried her. And then, she turned to look at me. Her eyes met mine, and in that moment, something inside me cracked wide open. She wasn't afraid. She wasn't even sad. She was warning me. Then she spoke. They never wanted the world to know. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried through the room like thunder. It wasn't a question. It wasn't a plea. It was a statement of fact. Jesus stepped forward, his expression unreadable. Diana, speak. The room trembled. The chandeliers rattled. The figures around us stilled, as if frozen in time. And then, the illusion shattered. The gold, the wealth, the refinement, it all melted away, revealing the truth beneath it. We were no longer in a palace. We were in a prison. The walls were no longer lined with paintings and bookshelves. They were lined with eyes, watching, waiting, silent. I felt something tighten around my chest, a pressure, a force, something unseen, but present. Jesus placed a hand on my shoulder, grounding me. See? And I saw. The people who had once appeared as royalty, as politicians, as men and women of power, they were not what they seemed. Their faces flickered, distorting, revealing something beneath the surface. Something darker. I turned to Diana, my voice shaking. What did you see? She closed her eyes, as if bracing herself before speaking again. The moment I understood was the moment I became a threat. Images flashed before me, Diana, standing alone in a dimly lit room, staring at a letter in her hands. Her fingers trembled as she read. I couldn't see the words, but I knew. It was something she was never meant to know. I saw her speaking to someone, her voice urgent, the fear in her eyes, the desperation. And then I saw the car, the tunnel, the crash. My body tensed. Every muscle screamed at me to look away, but I couldn't. I was forced to watch, the moment of impact, the flicker of headlights, the sound of twisting metal, and then the shadow. A figure standing at the edge of the wreckage, watching, waiting. Not a paramedic, not a bystander, something else. Jesus' voice broke through the vision. You were never meant to see this. I turned to him, my chest rising and falling too fast, though my body didn't require breath. Who were they? He didn't answer, not with words, but I knew. Diana looked at me again, and this time her eyes were pleading. They have done this for centuries. They are still doing it now, and they will continue unless they are stopped. Her voice cracked on the last word, and I could feel it, the weight of her truth pressing down on me. Jesus reached out again, and the vision shifted. We were no longer in the prison of false wealth. We were somewhere else, a city, tall buildings, flashing lights, streets filled with people moving like clockwork, their eyes fixed ahead, their faces devoid of life. It was the future. Or perhaps it was the present. I saw news screens flashing headlines, political figures standing before cameras, their smiles calculated, and behind them, the same shadows, the same presence. Jesus spoke again, his voice steady, unwavering. This is what comes next. Diana stepped forward, shaking her head. No, it has already begun. And then, in a blink, she was gone. I gasped, turning in every direction, but there was nothing, no trace of her. Jesus remained, his eyes locked on mine. You needed to see the truth. I swallowed hard, my mind racing, my soul trembling. What do I do with this? His gaze softened, and for the first time since this journey began, I saw something in his expression. Hope. You will tell them. The ground beneath us shifted, and suddenly, I was falling back toward the world I had left behind. And as I tumbled through the void, his voice reached me one last time. They will try to silence you, but the truth cannot be buried forever. I gasped as the weight of my body returned. The warmth of his presence faded, replaced by something heavier, something colder. I was back, but not in my body. Not yet. I was somewhere else. The air around me was thick, almost suffocating, like the atmosphere before a storm. The sky above wasn't like anything I had ever seen. Dark, swirling clouds pulsed with veins of unnatural light, shifting between shades of deep red and ashen gray. I stood in the middle of a massive city, but it was eerily silent. Towering skyscrapers stretched endlessly into the sky, covered in digital screens flashing images of men in suits, political figures, world leaders. Their faces were calm, reassuring. Their voices, though I could not hear them, carried the rhythm of control. Something was wrong. I turned to find Jesus standing beside me, his face solemn, his eyes holding a sadness I wasn't prepared to understand. What is this? I whispered, my voice barely carrying in the unnatural stillness. He turned his gaze toward the skyline, where a massive screen flickered above us. The image shifted, footage of people marching in unison, their expressions blank, their hands raised in silent obedience. This, he said, is the world as it has been shaped by them. As soon as he spoke, I knew who he meant. The ones in the shadows, the ones who had built the system, brick by brick, lie by lie. The ones who had ensured that those who questioned, those who saw beyond the illusion, would be silenced before they could awaken the rest. The elite, a force unseen but always present, manipulating history, dividing nations, keeping humanity bound in invisible chains. And then I saw them. A room, hidden behind walls of wealth and secrecy. A gathering of men and women dressed in the finest suits, seated around a massive circular table. Their faces were familiar, not because I knew them personally, but because the world did. Presidents, CEOs, religious leaders, media moguls, they were the architects of nations, the hands that controlled economies, the voices that shaped public opinion. But there was something behind their eyes, something hollow. Their lips moved in hushed conversations, but no words reached my ears. The longer I watched, the more I realized this was not just a meeting, it was a ritual. And then, a single voice cut through the silence. They created the division, and they did it to keep control. I turned sharply. Diana was standing beside me again. She wasn't radiant like before. There was no glow, no soft warmth. Instead, she looked grieved, as if the weight of what she knew had become too much to bear. They made it about race, she continued, her voice low, steady. But it was never about race. It was always about power. The words hit me like a tidal wave. I turned back to the scene before me, and suddenly I saw it. The way history had been rewritten, the way entire societies had been carefully molded through fear and resentment. The elite had built their empire on division, turning people against each other so they would never look up and see who was truly pulling the strings. Black against white, rich against poor, left against right. The illusion was perfect. A distraction, so deeply embedded that no one dared to question it, and those who did disappeared. I swallowed hard. Diana, is that why they... Yes, she answered before I could finish. I was never supposed to ask questions. I was never supposed to see what I saw. Her eyes burned with something between anger and sorrow. They knew I would speak, and so they ended it before I could. Jesus remained silent, allowing the truth to settle over me like an unbearable weight. My mind raced, piecing it all together. The wars, the policies, the media-driven hysteria, all of it orchestrated. A carefully calculated game where no one ever truly won except for those at the top. I looked back at the table, my stomach twisting. Who are they? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Jesus finally spoke. They have many names, many faces. They shift through history like ghosts, ruling without thrones, reigning without crowns. I watched as the figures at the table changed, morphing, shifting, their identities fading and reforming as the decades passed. New leaders, same agenda, always hidden, always untouchable. And then, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A man stood at the center of the room, his back turned to me. He wore no crown, no robe, but the power radiating from him was undeniable. The others listened when he spoke, they nodded, they obeyed. He was their leader, and when he turned, I saw his face, familiar, charismatic, the kind of face that people trusted. I knew him, the world knew him, but what chilled me to my core wasn't who he was, it was what he was. His eyes burned with something unnatural, something inhuman. A darkness so complete that even surrounded by wealth and luxury, it could not be hidden. Jesus exhaled softly, his expression unreadable. This is the one they will follow. A tremor ran through me. The one who will bring it all together, Diana whispered, her voice barely audible. The final piece of the puzzle, the great unifier, the one the world would welcome with open arms, a leader who would promise peace, equality, justice, for all. But behind his words would be chains. Invisible at first, but real. and permanent. I felt my hands trembling. And no one sees it? Jesus turned to me, his expression heavy with sorrow. Some do. But the world has been trained not to listen. I clenched my fists, the weight of it all crashing over me. The division, the deception, the truth hidden in plain sight. It wasn't just history. It was happening now, and worse. It was almost complete. I turned back to the table, to the faces of those who sat there. Some I recognized. Some I didn't. But I knew one thing. They had already decided the fate of the world, and no one even knew they were making the choice. Jesus spoke again, his voice steady, unwavering. But there is still time. Diana nodded, her eyes locking onto mine. But not much. A deep hum filled the space around us, a vibration that shook through my bones. The vision was fading. Jesus' eyes bore into mine, and his words echoed through my soul. You must tell them. The world around me blurred. The table, the city, Diana, they all began to dissolve into light. My chest tightened. I wasn't ready. I wasn't ready to leave. I wasn't ready to carry this burden. But I had no choice. The truth had been given to me, and the ones who had buried it for centuries would do everything to keep it from being spoken. The last thing I saw before the world disappeared was the man at the table, smiling, waiting. And then, everything went black. I was falling. The world around me blurred, dissolving into streaks of color and sound. My chest tightened, my pulse hammering in my ears, though I had no body to contain it. I wasn't in control. I wasn't choosing this. Something was pulling me. Then, just as suddenly as it began, it stopped. I landed on solid ground, my feet touching something smooth and cold. The air was dense, humming with an energy that felt unnatural, synthetic. I looked up and gasped. The city stretched endlessly before me, taller, sharper, more advanced than anything I had ever seen. Towering skyscrapers lined the horizon, their surfaces sleek and seamless, glowing with an eerie blue light. Digital screens covered every building, flashing images of world leaders, symbols I didn't recognize, messages in languages that shifted and changed. The streets were silent, not because they were empty, far from it. People moved in perfect synchronization, walking in straight lines, their heads down, their eyes locked on glowing screens projected in front of them. Their faces were blank, emotionless. No one spoke, no one laughed, no one looked at each other. It felt wrong, deeply, horribly wrong. Jesus stood beside me, his face unreadable. His presence was the only thing keeping me from crumbling, under the weight of what I was seeing. "What is this?" I asked, though deep down I already knew. His voice was steady, but heavy with sorrow. "This is what comes next." The words sent a shiver through me. I turned in a slow circle, taking in the world around me. It was clean, precise, calculated, but it was devoid of life. Everything was controlled. Every movement, every interaction, every thought. I looked at the people again, searching for any sign of humanity, but they weren't living. They were functioning. Then I noticed something. Their hands. Small, glowing implants embedded beneath their skin. They raised them to doors, to payment screens, to communication devices. The entire system revolved around it. Their jobs, their access to food, transportation, healthcare. Everything depended on the implant. I swallowed hard. "What is that?" Jesus turned his gaze toward the massive screen that hovered above the city. The image changed. A man stood at the center of a grand stage, his arms open in a gesture of unity. His voice carried across the silent crowd. They watched him with unwavering devotion. I had seen him before, the man from the meeting, the one at the table. I felt my stomach twist. He wasn't just leading, he was worshipped. The people didn't just listen to him, they obeyed him, without question, without hesitation. Jesus exhaled softly. They trust him. I shook my head, stepping back. No, this isn't possible. People wouldn't just but I couldn't even finish the sentence, because I knew they would. I had already seen how the world was conditioned, the fear, the division, the chaos. They had been preparing for this, for him. Jesus continued, his voice steady but firm. It did not begin this way. The scene around us shifted. I saw people hesitating, questioning, resisting. Governments and corporations pushing the implant as something harmless, something convenient. At first, it was optional, a choice. Then, it became necessary. Stores stopped accepting physical cash. Hospitals required it for medical records. Public transportation no longer functioned without it. People didn't fight it. They adapted. And by the time they realized what had happened, it was too late. I watched as businesses denied service to those without it. I saw parents forced to choose between feeding their children and giving in. I saw pastors standing at pulpits, telling their congregations that it was nothing to fear, that it was just a tool, that it wasn't the mark they had been warned about. And then I saw the final stage. The world before me darkened. The buildings flickered, disappearing into shadows, leaving only the people behind. Chains wrapped around their wrists, their ankles, their throats. They couldn't see them, but they were there, binding them, owning them. I turned to Jesus, my voice barely a whisper. They don't even know. He nodded. That is how deception works. The image shifted again. I saw a woman, a mother, standing in line with her child. Her hands trembled as she pressed her palm against a scanner. A red light blinked. Denied. She tried again. The same result. A guard stepped forward, shaking his head. Without the upgrade, you cannot access your account. Her voice cracked. But my son, he needs medicine. Please. The guard didn't flinch. Then comply. I felt my heart shatter as I watched the desperation in her eyes. She looked down at her child, then back at the scanner, and with shaking hands, she extended her arm. A small device hummed to life. A single drop of blood, a signature, and then the chain locked around her wrist. But she didn't feel it. She only felt relief. Jesus turned to me, his eyes filled with something indescribable. This is what they will call freedom. I covered my mouth, trying to stop the rising scream in my throat. It was perfect. The perfect lie. No war, no violence, just acceptance. They didn't force people into chains. They convinced them to willingly put them on. I turned away, my hands shaking. Why are you showing me this? Jesus reached out, lifting my chin so I was forced to meet his gaze. Because they must see before it is too late. The word sent a chill. Through my soul, I wanted to run, to shut my eyes and make it all disappear. But I couldn't, because I knew. I knew this wasn't just a warning. It was already happening. The darkness was already creeping in, and when it finally reached its full form, no one would be able to escape. I took a step back, my breath uneven. How do I stop it? Jesus exhaled, and for the first time, I saw something in his eyes that I hadn't expected. Pain. You cannot stop what has been set in motion. A cold dread sank into my bones. But there is still hope, he continued. For those who choose to see. For those who choose me. The city around us flickered, growing dim, unstable. The illusion was breaking. I felt something pulling me again. I wasn't ready, not yet. But I had no choice. The vision was ending. The last thing I saw before everything collapsed into darkness was the leader on the screen, his eyes locking onto mine. And for the briefest moment, he smiled. I gasped. Pain slammed into me all at once, sharp, overwhelming, suffocating. My chest felt like it had been crushed, my limbs too heavy to move. A shrill beeping sound filled the air, voices shouting in frantic urgency. She's back! We've got a pulse! I wasn't dead anymore. I was in a hospital bed, machines. Connected to my body, wires running along my arms. The fluorescent lights above burned into my retinas. Too bright, too artificial. I tried to breathe, but every inhale felt like fire. I was alive. The weight of that realization sank into me, but it wasn't relief that filled my chest. It was something else. The truth. The images of what I had seen crashed over me like a tidal wave. The city, the people, the chains they couldn't see, the man on the screen, Diana's warning, Jesus' voice telling me, "You must tell them." Tears pricked my eyes, but they weren't from pain. I had to tell them. I had to warn them. A nurse leaned over me, her eyes filled with shock and concern. "Naomi, can you hear me?" I tried to speak, but my throat was dry, my voice nothing more than a rasp. She turned to a doctor. "She shouldn't be awake this soon. The injuries... I need..." My voice was barely audible, my lungs burning with every breath. "I need to talk." The doctor shook his head. "Not now. You need rest." No, I didn't have time for rest. I struggled to sit up, but my body refused to cooperate. Frustration burned in my veins. I had been sent back for a reason, and they were telling me to stay silent? I looked around the room. My sister was there, standing near the door, her hands clasped together. The moment our eyes met, her face crumpled, and she rushed to my side. "Naomi," she whispered, gripping my hand. "Oh my God, you're alive." Tears spilled down her cheeks, but she wasn't crying from sadness. She was crying from disbelief. "They said you wouldn't make it," she choked. "The accident. You were gone for so long." The accident. It felt like another lifetime ago. I squeezed her hand, my throat aching as I forced out the words. "I saw him." She blinked. "What?" "Jesus," I whispered. "I saw him." The room fell into silence. The doctor and nurse exchanged glances, their expressions unreadable. My sister's grip tightened on mine. "Naomi, you hit your head. You were unconscious for..." "I died." My voice was stronger this time. "I left my body. I saw the other side. And I saw what's coming." The words felt foreign in my mouth, but they were the only truth I knew. My sister hesitated. You were dreaming." "No." I shook my head, forcing myself to sit up despite the searing pain in my ribs. "Listen to me. It wasn't a dream. It was real. Jesus showed me what's happening, what's already happening, and what's coming next." I could see the doubt in her eyes, the hesitation, the struggle to understand. She wasn't the only one. The nurse took a step back, suddenly too busy with the IV drip. The doctor checked his watch, pretending not to hear me. They didn't believe me. I turned to my sister, my heart pounding. Diana. Her brow furrowed. "What?" "I saw Diana. Princess Diana. She tried to warn me. She tried to warn all of us. She knew about them. The people who control everything. The ones who decide what we see, what we believe, what we think is real." My sister's face went pale. "Naomi?" "She wasn't supposed to know," I continued, the urgency growing inside me. "And when she did, they silenced her. Just like they do to everyone who gets too close." My sister took a step back. "You're not making sense." I reached for her hand again, desperation creeping into my voice. "I need you to believe me." She shook her head. "I don't know what to think." She turned to the doctor, her voice quieter now. "Could this be from the head injury? Some kind of hallucination?" The doctor nodded slightly, as if this was the explanation they had all been waiting for. "It's not uncommon for trauma survivors to experience confusion, even vivid dreams. With time, she'll regain clarity." Clarity? They thought I was confused? They thought the truth was a hallucination? I felt my pulse spike, frustration bubbling under my skin. "You don't understand. They want you to think that. They want you to believe I'm crazy. That's how they win. That's how they keep people quiet." The doctor forced a small, rehearsed smile. "You need rest, Naomi. We can talk more when you're feeling better." No. This was exactly what they wanted. For the truth to be dismissed as delusion. For warnings to be written off as paranoia. The system was already in place. I had seen it. I had watched as people willingly put on their chains. And now, I was seeing how they handled those who refused. I had a choice. I could stay quiet, pretend none of this had happened, let them convince me that it was all in my head, or I could fight. I turned to my sister, my eyes burning with intensity. You don't have to believe me, but listen, just listen. She hesitated. Naomi, watch what's happening in the world, I whispered. The technology, the control, the way they're slowly taking away freedom and calling it security. Watch how they push fear, how they make people turn against each other. Watch the way they make it all seem normal. A flicker of doubt passed over her face. It was small, barely noticeable, but it was enough. They will call me crazy, I said. They will tell you I imagined all of it. But when you start seeing the signs, when you see them pushing the implants, when you see the world turning into the system I described, you'll remember this moment. And when that happens, you need to make a choice. The room was silent. Then she whispered, "What choice?" I took a deep breath. To wake up. The air between us felt heavy, charged with something I couldn't name. And then suddenly the machines next to me started beeping erratically. The nurse rushed forward. Her heart rate is spiking. The doctor reached for a syringe. We need to stabilize her. I tried to speak, but a wave of dizziness crashed over me. No, not now. I couldn't let them silence me. I opened my mouth to speak, but the world around me blurred. The last thing I saw was my sister's face, wide-eyed, uncertain. And then everything faded to black.